Please welcome Brittany Thomas-Vestal to the show. Hi, Brittany.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I just realized that we're recording on 9/11, which is just so interesting because I actually kind of came into this field right after 9/11.
Wow. I actually didn't realize it when I was scheduling it. And then today I was like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be recording today, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways that I know we haven't really talked about this, but 9/11 has a lot to do with why I got into working with first responders. So,
A lot of my peers ended up in the military and becoming firefighters and police officers
yep,
as a result
yep.
of 9/11. Tell me about yourself. What do you do? Who do you serve? And let's hear a little bit about you and your fire family.
I'm a first responder therapist up in Northern California, and I work with first responders, their spouses, their teenage kids, their partners, and I also specialize in working with individuals and couples going through infertility, specifically around IVF. So that's the bulk of my caseload right now. My husband's a firefighter. He's about 2 years away from retirement up here in Northern California, and we have 4 kids. I have a 10-year-old, a 16-year-old, and 2 kids that turn 19 in a couple weeks. So we're busy.
We have very similar age groups. My kids are 15, 17, and 20. So we have college student, almost graduated, and then 2 more years of high school.
Yep.
So, yeah. So we're going through those teen years. They're fun, aren't they?
It's a challenge. I always tell people if you can make it through 15, you're good.
Yeah, and I'm in the thick of 15 right now. And it's interesting because my 15-year-old is my most well-behaved and most compassionate child, but he's got this little like rebellious attitude coming through at 15. And it's not even bad. It's just like I'm a rebel without a cause. I just want to argue to argue. And I'm like, okay, well, I mean, the case can be made for maybe that's going to make him a strong leader someday. Who knows? But
Yeah. So we're fun to parent.
yeah. Well, and I think that comes from having very strong-willed parents as well. You have your firefighters that are, leaders, and then mom probably is a little bit more independent. I think that it rubs off
Yes.
on the kids for that for sure.
Oh, I absolutely see a commonality. Absolutely. Yes. A lot of my kids' friends that have first responder parents tend to be a little bit more emotionally mature. They are able to communicate with adults really well. So it's been interesting to see
Mhm.
that dynamic when they're making friends and I meet them.
Yeah, I think for my kids, it's actually harder to make friends because of that. They struggle to make friends that they can relate to because they have a different mentality. Like you said, the maturity level and being able to hold an adult conversation and talk about topics in a articulate way is a really interesting part of this lifestyle. And that's totally not what we're here to talk about.
Yeah.
So we're getting off on our own parenting stuff now. But I think you're right. All of the first responder kids that I've interacted with, it's the same thing. They're all
Mhm.
very attuned to more adult things, and I think it's just the nature of the job. But
Yep.
I also think that comes with this generation. These kids have more information at their fingertips than ever before, and so they're processing that in a different way than we ever did. 9/11 it felt like the turning point in media. Never before had we seen a news cycle repeat itself so many times over so many months, and I think that really changed how we take in information as a
Oh,
society.
so
So,
yeah.
anyway, and your kids are a result of that. Right?
Yes.
So, so you struggled with infertility and your husband's a firefighter.
Yes.
And yes, and that's actually what we're here to talk about today.
Although I got the kids from IVF, so
Yes, you did. So we could talk. Yes, the kids are part of it, but the
yes.
real topic today, I think that most people want to hear about is the struggle with infertility and how the fire service impacts IVF and other choices that you can make within that space. And
Yeah.
so let's start by tell me about how you were both affected by it at home and at work, having your husband
Um,
being a firefighter.
So my parents struggled with infertility. So we found out pretty early on in our marriage that we were infertile and nothing was happening. We basically self-referred after a year and found out that the only way we could have children was through in vitro, and specifically a technology that had only been around for 10 years. So I don't know that we would have even been able to have children had that technology not been available. So we went through tons of testing, medication before that. And even just trying to get pregnant naturally as a first responder is so complicated because you've got cycles and you've got shifts, and your first responder may be tired. They may not be home. And so I remember specifically this one station, my husband had to keep leaving to go home so we could try and get pregnant. And they actually clapped for him as he left because they knew he had to keep leaving so often. And so, in a way, when we found out that we were going through IVF, it was almost like a relief. It was like, okay, just take this over for us, because they take over your hormones, they put you on a schedule. There is, in a way, some ability to plan. So I think going through infertility in the fire service, you have to get really comfortable with taking time off work, using FMLA. Unfortunately, at the time, I mean, this was like 20 years ago, IVF was still pretty new. There wasn't a lot known about it. There was still a lot of stigma, and I think there still is. And so my husband didn't feel like he could really talk about it to a lot of people. There's a lot of belief systems around infertility treatments. And so he always ran the risk of, is this person going to judge him? Is he going to say something? Is he going to, dismiss him? So that's one of the hard things, is just being in that environment, being with a crew, and going through this really kind of silently. And there's the physical toll that your spouse is going through. For female firefighters, there's a physical toll that they may be going through while they're working. There's the emotional toll, and then there's a huge financial toll. Even though that has changed and more is covered, I think it's only like a once in a lifetime benefit. So you do one cycle. And so for us, just for our first two kids, it was like $40,000 plus, I think. I mean, every single blood test, ultrasound, everything was out of pocket. And so it was incredibly stressful, just trying to figure out, how are we even going to pay for this?
Yeah. That the added stress of the financials on top of all of the things you have to do, or I can't even imagine it. What would you say to a fire wife who feels like she's carrying the emotional weight of both infertility and the fire schedule alone?
Mm. Well, I mean, one thing that I will say is that anyone, especially first responders going through infertility, should really consider getting support themselves, whether that's their own individual therapy or couples therapy. That can be really beneficial. Thankfully, therapy can be done virtually now too. And so you can kind of fit that in between work and your appointments. I know for us, we didn't really seek individual therapy until we started trying for my third child, which was my second pregnancy. And I knew that I needed something to ground me. I knew that if it didn't look like it was working, I needed someone to be able to say, hey, look, we need to talk about this. We need to figure this out. Because I was afraid, which I find with a lot of my clients, is that I would just keep going. So I think that that can be a big part of it, is making sure that you have a support system,
Mhm.
especially for first responders. They're continually being exposed to trauma. Just even going through infertility can trigger a lot of that too. And it can create a lot of issues in the marriage. So I would say, really leaning into getting the emotional support, making sure that you have even just one or two friends that get it, that are just going to be there for you, just listen, not give you advice, not suggest anything. Making sure that your spouse has some way to process what's going on too. And also making sure that for the spouses, if they're working, talk to your work, make sure that you tap into FMLA, talk to your doctor, see what options you have, because that can be incredibly stressful.
Do you think that infertility is still a quiet topic in the fire service?
I do. Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot to that. There's the stigma of not being able to get pregnant. You're working with all of these very masculine people that have all these children. And, that's what we're meant to do. We're meant to have children. We should be able to do that. These are the messages, I think we tell ourselves, like, I should be able to have biological children. And for women, like, I should be a mother. That's what I'm supposed to do. And so I think that there's obviously that stigma when you can't get pregnant. And I think, especially in the fire service, when you're, literally surrounded by hundreds of different people, to you, you perceive that for everyone else, that's not accurate, but you perceive that it's so easy for everyone else. And so I think it makes a lot of people kind of isolate and go inward. I think the financial stigma too is a big one that is not talked about enough. Suddenly you're working a lot of overtime, or you're unable to do things because you don't have money. You have to completely change your lifestyle, and people aren't understanding that. And so while other people have children and they didn't go through that, and they're able to, not work as much overtime or save money or go on vacations, your experience is so different. And I think that there's a lot of shame in that, even though there shouldn't be. There is shame in having debt. And even though it's for a medical purpose, I think that can be really difficult. People won't understand. There's oftentimes like, why don't you just adopt? Why don't you just not have children? And then I think that there's a lot of religious beliefs. There's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of assumptions around IVF. And so I think that can play into it too. And that can make it really hard when you're trying to seek support.
So if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice during your IVF journey, what would it be?
Oh gosh. It's a good question. I think it probably would have been to slow down. Felt like we were on a train and we just had to keep moving. And I don't think I allowed myself to slow down. But I also didn't have a lot of support. And so I think I would tell myself to seek out therapy much sooner in the process, and just really slow down and try and take care of myself, because you go through IVF, and then if you get pregnant, then you're going through a pregnancy. For us, it was, we went through IVF, then we got pregnant with twins. And then suddenly we were launched into having two children at the same time. And our life was forever changed. And it was a good thing. I mean, obviously it was wonderful. I'm so glad we were able to have them. But life never slowed down. It basically sped up from there.
Having kids will definitely speed up your life a little bit.
Yes. And I think for a lot of my couples that I work with, it's reminding them that in between your treatments, really trying to put all that stuff on a shelf for a little bit and focus on your marriage or focus on yourself, getting back into those things that you love, exercise, hobbies, getting away for the weekend, because that happens. Like, then you do end up hopefully getting pregnant, and you don't really have time to really process everything that's happened. And I definitely think that was the case for us. I don't think we ever really processed what happened until years later.
I would say that's probably pretty common in most circumstances like that. I think it's common just in parenting alone. We're going through whatever we're going through with our kids, and then 5 years later, we're like, oh, yeah, that happened. And this is how we felt about it at the time. And this is how we feel about it now.
And it's interesting because my husband and I were kind of going back and talking about our experience, because I knew I was going to come on here and my brain sometimes is still foggy about all the dates. We had talked about how much that changed us, how much financially it set us back as a family, and how much we never really processed about that time period. It's taken us many years to kind of look back and be like, wow, that was really hard. That was a lot. How do we do that? And for us, it was at the time 3 kids under 3 years old. Was a lot.
3 kids under 3. Wow.
Because we didn't know if we could get pregnant again. We're like, well, if our infertility is severe, then we just need to try again right away. We did end up trying multiple cycles, and we were kind of like on our Hail Mary cycle when I got pregnant with my middle son. And that also happened to be right after the recession started in 2008. And so basically, like, all of our means of funding IVF kind of shut down after that. So we were very lucky. We were very fortunate. the timing of it all.
That really paints the really big picture of the resilience that we have as fire families. We go through things like this and we have to deal with the fire schedule and the solo parenting and all of that. And then we get to the end of it and like, wow, we did that. At the time, it feels really hard, but we're doing it. We're making it through it.
I reflect on that a lot now that my husband is close to retirement. It's like looking back and realizing, wow, that went so fast.
And my
We
husband
did
and I were
that.
just having that conversation last night. He was like, am I turning 45 or 44? And I'm like, I think you're turning 44. And I'm like, yeah, you were born in 81. So you're turning 44. And he was like, darn it, that means I have 6 more years. I thought I had 5 more years. And I'm like, yeah, but you realize 5 years is going to fly by. I mean, I can
Yes.
barely remember 10 years ago. 5 years
Yeah.
is so short in the grand scheme of things. And he was like, you're right, you're right. But we don't feel that way when we're in it, you know?
One of the interesting parts of our story is that we ended up getting pregnant naturally with my fourth son right after the recession because we had sold our house, we moved into an apartment with our 3 kids, and we're like, we're just going to work really hard, pay off all this medical debt. And then we got pregnant with him. And I do think back during that time, I found out I was pregnant the day before the King Fire. And so my husband was deployed to the King Fire, and we basically processed that whole thing by text. We also basically bought our house because we had to move through text messaging. He basically helped me buy a house while he was on a strike team. I think I was like 14 weeks pregnant when we moved into our house. And I get very sick during my pregnancies, so that was incredibly painful to go through a move and finding a house.
Yeah. Yeah. I get incredibly sick during my pregnancies as well. So I can totally relate to like, holy moly, now I have to pack up the house and I'm probably throwing up every like I if I didn't eat every hour, I was definitely throwing up and feeling just like a zombie and not having any energy and having other children to deal with. And then on top of that, buying a house and having to move.
That's kind of the interesting thing I find with the spouses that I'm working with that are first responder spouses is, going back to that idea of we go through these fertility treatments. And then if you're fortunate enough to get pregnant, then it's this whole nother set of, the hormones, possibly sickness, possibly pregnancy complications, and in some cases, pregnancy loss. And so I think
Yeah.
that's something that's not really talked about too is how often when couples are going through infertility treatments, they are experiencing like pretty significant pregnancy losses. It kind of piles on for them.
Just being pregnant alone and getting pregnant naturally, there's a lot that goes into that as a fire family. And then to have all the risks that come with IVF on top of that is even more challenging. And then post pregnancy, when you've had your child, then we may have postpartum depression setting in and all these other things that come along with having a baby and so
Yes.
on and so forth. Then how do we navigate all of that when a lot of the times, our guys don't even get a full postpartum cycle off. Like, and if they do get it off, then they're like home for however many weeks and then they're just gone. And then we're left
They're
to
just
deal with a newborn. They're just gone.
I have 2 kids that were born in May and June, and that's when wildland season actually started in June. And so two wildland seasons that I had infants. Now it's like maybe September, October, sometimes maybe in February, apparently. But
Yeah.
yes, it's crazy to think back of how I coped during that time, having so many young children while he was gone. And I think to your point about the postpartum depression, I mean, the good thing now is that we have so many more perinatal therapists that also work with first responders. I want to
Yeah.
say there's probably 4 up in my region alone.
That's awesome.
And I think for my husband and I, that's something that we didn't even consider because we just had to do it. We didn't have family
Right.
support. We didn't have anyone helping. We just had to power through. And I think back, I'm like, I probably did have postpartum depression and I didn't even realize it. But now there's so much more information, there's so much more support. So I think that's huge.
Do you think that first responder couples, do you think that women are more prone to postpartum depression because of the fact that their husband or spouse leaves and is gone for multiple days in a row and they're left to handle it alone?
I've actually thought about this because I don't think there's been a study done on this, and I do think that that's something that needs to be looked at for sure because I suspect it is. I suspect the rates are much higher. I suspect the rates of depression, anxiety, and PTSD are higher. Absolutely. I don't see how it can't be, given the fact that so many first responder spouses are spending so many days alone in those early days of postpartum.
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I had family really close by, so I had a wonderful support system, and I was rarely alone in those first several weeks. So I don't feel like I necessarily had postpartum depression, but still just the weight of being the parent and not having your partner there is enough. I didn't feel that way in my first one. When we had our now 15-year-old, it felt really heavy. It felt like, oh gosh, now I have 3 kids and
Mhm.
how am I going to do all of this? And so when he went back to work, it was like, crap, what am I going to do now? Like, and then of course the family support eventually kind of wanes off. So
Yeah.
you're used to all of the support. And then all of a sudden I was having to ask for help instead of it just automatically coming to me. I think there's some shame around asking for help as a mother.
So many of us as fire wives are hyper independent. And I think oftentimes we're connected with our spouses because of that mutual independence. And it can be incredibly valuable. I think for a lot of us, it's our superpower to be able to cope with what we do. And it can also be really damaging because we don't ask for help, because we kind of give ourselves these messages that, well, this is what a good mother does. This is what a first responder wife does. I hear that a lot. Like, I've been a good first responder wife. I've heard that from several wives that are close to retirement. And, now that they're kind of going through their own grieving process of like looking back at their life as a fire wife and what they went through, what they sacrificed, what they experienced.
Mhm.
And there is definitely this idea of, I did what I did. I did what I needed to do to be a good fire wife. And it's like, what does that even mean? Why are we all walking around thinking like we need to be these perfect superhuman women? And so I do see that like so much kind of grief around this desire to be perfect and to be so highly functional and to be so on top of it. And you get those messages from people too of like, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you go so many days without your spouse home. I don't know about other people, but sometimes I find myself when I'm sitting at the baseball game by myself or I'm doing a holiday by myself of just kind of like dying inside a little bit of like,
Mhm.
but I don't want to do it alone.
Right, because we have this picture from when we're young to what marriage is supposed to look like, what a relationship is supposed to look like, and then we get into a marriage with a firefighter and it's not what we thought it was gonna be. If we've never been exposed to this lifestyle and now we're all of a sudden marrying this firefighter and our picture of love and marriage and life with someone else is that they're home and they're with the family every day and there's family dinners and they're going to sports events together and all of these milestones are happening together. And then all of a sudden we realize, wait, that's not my life. Of course, we're going to grieve what we thought we were going to have. And it's totally natural.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because my twins graduated last year and we were fortunate enough to get COVID right when they graduated. So we were absolutely miserable during that time, but that only added to how emotional we felt. But the next day, I remember sitting at the table with my husband. We were drinking some coffee, and that was the first time that I cried. And I hadn't cried for weeks. I've just been kind of going. Like, it even makes me emotional talking about it. I think for us, it was like this realization, like, we did it and we didn't have any support to do it. That like profound grief that we felt, not having that support system to raise our children, to get breaks so that we didn't feel constantly burnt out and tired and stressed. That's such a huge part of it too. And so I think for a lot of my clients that I talk to, it's, how do you find those breaks? Like even those like little micro breaks, how do you find that support? Even if you have to pay for it sometimes, it's hard.
It is. It is hard, but it can be done, and a lot more resources now than there ever has been before. It's also valuable that we talk about it as people that have been doing it for so long and have been through these things,
Mhm.
because it really tells the next generation, if you're feeling the same way, it's totally valid and normal. So I'm thankful that you were willing to have this conversation with me today. So
Yeah,
much for being
absolutely.
vulnerable and telling me your story.
Yes.
I really appreciate it.
It's so important. So I mean, I appreciate that you are sharing these insights and stories for especially other fire spouses. It's huge because that's going to help us
Yeah,
support our first responders. That's going to help us better understand them and better understand what's coming into the marriage, how we're showing up as spouses, as parents. And that's so important.
it is. I agree. That's why we're here. How do people get a hold of you?
The best way is through my website, BrittanyThomas-Vestal.com. We've got a ton of amazing, culturally competent therapists up here in Northern California.
And I am assuming that you have some resources on your website that point to those other resources as well.
So, what I always tell people is that if they're looking for someone, they're welcome to reach out to me. My phone number is on my website, my email, my contact form. And if I'm not a good fit, I am absolutely willing to help them find someone. And a lot of us do virtual therapy. So, we can see clients all over California.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much.